us how you got to where you are now. Was sports journalism always what you wanted to do?
No, it wasn't, no. I hadn't a clue what I wanted to do. Left school in Limerick with a pretty average leaving cert,
Right.
A-levels, and hadn't literally, it was bizarre. I always loved sport, and I always loved writing, and I didn't have the intelligence to put the two of them together and think that sports writing was for me. Literally, I did never put them together. So I went to college, a regional college in County Kerry, a place called Trainee. Some of the lads here will know it. And I did business studies for 2 years and hated it. Loved the social side of it, but hated it. Managed to scrape over the line and get my diploma, my certificate, excuse me. So I didn't have the points to go to university. I then went to London and worked in building sites for 18 months.
Right.
Finding myself. Then I went with two of my pals from Limerick to South America for 6 months, finding myself. And it was really in South America when the penny dropped, because I was constantly writing. I'd become a fan. When I was living in London, I lived in a place called Leighton, which is in East London. And Leighton Orient ground was down the road from the flat I was staying in. So I went to Leighton Orient matches every Saturday. And while I was in Brazil, I wrote an article and I posted it to the Leighton Orient fanzine, the Leighton Orienteer it was called. And they published it. It was the very first time I had anything published. Right? And when I saw it, I absolutely got this incredible thrill. And I think that was the spark. When I came home, I went back to Limerick and I applied for a non-graduate traineeship with the Sunday Times.
Right.
And I got it. And I'm convinced to this day, you know, like you see your career, your life almost in like microcosm. And I remember going to do the interview with the Sunday Times, very intimidating. It was in Wapping. I'm from like small city, Limerick. You go into this incredibly sophisticated, massive place like Wapping. And I was interviewed by the managing editor, a fellow called Duncan Jeffrey. And I had meticulously prepared. And I knew at this stage I wanted to be a journalist. I mean, I was so passionate to the point of obsession at this point. And I went in and did the interview and it was fine. And he said, "That's grand. We'll be in touch with you to see, if you're successful or not." And I said to him, and I'm convinced it was the only reason I got the job. I said to him before I left, "Do you mind if I have a look around while I'm here?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I don't know if I'm coming back." Now, I wasn't at it, but I was genuinely interested to see where the newspapers were printed, where the journalists worked, who was who, because I knew all the names from the bylines in the newspapers. And he said, "Okay, I'll take you around myself." And he took me around for half an hour, and the News of the World was there, the Sun, the Sunday Times, and the Times. And I was just engrossed by this scene. I'm convinced that he saw in me passion. And, if there's one word I would use to kind of describe the bit of, I suppose, the reason I've got to the BBC and that is passion. It's all about passion.
These guys are obviously pursuing quite a different route to that, and they're learning journalism in a kind of academic environment. If we went back and read that first article that you wrote back in Brazil, would it be any differently? Do you feel you've learned journalism, or is it something that you always had?
Oh no, the article was hopeless. I still have it. It was terrible. And I was writing terrible stuff for many, many years after that, let me tell you. But I was learning as I was going along. I have had a very unconventional route into journalism. For your first journalism job to be in a Fleet Street newspaper is freaky. Now, I was a year delivering mail. I was a messenger, effectively. That's what I was. But a couple of hours a week, I got to sit beside a very experienced journalist in the newsroom or the sports desk and just watch them. Listen to them talking to people on the phone, looking at them constructing stories, and they were very patient with me because I was very bolshy and I was asking loads of questions and I was just probably getting in their way and annoying them. But I had great mentors. I was really, really lucky to have that grounding. And then I went to football matches and with the football correspondent of the Sunday Times at the time, and he put me under pressure. He said, right, you're not just coming here for a day out. You're coming here to work. So he said, you got to write an 800-word match report, and you got to file it. You got to hand it to me.
At the full-time whistle.
Full-time whistle. And I did. It was unspeakably bad. It was terrible. But my head didn't explode, and that's what he was looking for. I actually gave it to him on time. It was rubbish, but I managed to deal with the pressure of it. And I kept doing that and kept doing it and kept doing it. I watched matches on the television at home and writing match reports all the time. And that's kind of how I learned.
So when did you first get into print then at News International?
I was getting kind of additional reporting bylines pretty much from the start. But then in all of that happened in 1991, when I was 22. And in 1992, they sent me to Scotland for 3 months as part of my traineeship, and I ended up staying 4 years. And again, I was really lucky because about 3 months after I arrived, they relaunched the Scottish edition of the Sunday Times. There was more Scottish sport put in it overnight, and the only one in the office who knew anything about sport was me. So I became almost de facto Scottish sports editor. Hadn't a clue what I was doing, but I was in at the deep end, and I learned, and I just, I just worked and worked and worked. Again, I had a great mentor, a fellow called Tony Alloway, brilliant journalist, my God, brilliant, and had the patience of a saint to go through my stuff, paragraph by paragraph, saying, no, the story isn't there, the story should be up there, that's tautology, you don't need that, you've too much of this, you don't have enough of that. I mean, it's rare that you would get journalists spending that amount of time with young journalists now, and it's a shame. It's a great, great shame. And if it wasn't for him and for maybe 3 or 4 others along the way, I think I'd struggle. I should tell a story, actually. Also as part of the traineeship of the Sunday Times, they sent me to Cardiff University for 4 months, for a journalism course.
Right.
Right? And I failed it. Right? But I knew I was going to fail it. I kind of almost failed it on purpose. Right?
Right. Why was that? Talk me through the strategy there.
Again, a bit dim-witted and a bit headstrong. But again, it was one of the kind of seminal moments, I think, on the way. One of my lecturers, he was a guy who taught how to write a news story, how to write a feature. And he was telling me that there's only one way to write a news story and one way to write a feature. And I said, no, there isn't. And he said, yes, there is. I said, no, there isn't. So it was a back and forward. And he says, well, if you write that news story the way you're going to write it, you'll fail your exam. And I said, well, okay, I'm going to fail my exam.
Right.
So I wrote it, and I failed my exam. And I remember Andrew Neil was the editor at the time of the Sunday Times, and his number 2 was a fellow called Tony Bambridge, the scariest man I have ever met in journalism, but also the most inspiring. He called me in, and he had these like half-rimmed glasses, and he used to stare at you over the top of the glasses. Absolutely terrifying. And he called me into his office, and he said, Mr. English, you failed your exam. Would you care to tell me what happened? And it was just frightening. So I told him the story, and he said, right, off you go. And he said, I'll talk to you later in the day. And for the rest of the day, I was absolutely petrified, because if my parents knew what I'd done, they'd have killed me. This was my big chance in life, and I was after blowing it, right? So he called me in, and he said, I've just been on on the phone to Cardiff to tell them we're never sending another one of our students back.
Yes.
So you were right, they were wrong. Off you go. Now I floated out of the place. And it kind of taught me,
Don't give them ideas though about not listening to the lecture.
just have the courage of your convictions. I was convinced I was right. Now, I don't know if Bambridge thought I was right or not, but he could see that I thought I was right, and that I had the balls enough to go through with it. And I think that was a big moment for me, to have the confidence to, if you think something is right, go and do it.
Yeah, and I think when talking to these guys, being distinctive is such a big thing in journalism, almost like in marketing terms, thinking, what's my unique selling point? What do I do that nobody else does?
Well, that's what I say. I mean, it's not so much now that I'm in the BBC, but when I was with the Scotsman and when I was with the Sunday Times, I used to get a lot of letters from journalism students. And I used to tell them all, you know, show me something. You know, have something that's unique, stand out. What is it about you that makes me want to give you a job? You know, you have to show something, whatever it is. Passion. There was one guy, when the Scotsman, he was a very talented young writer, actually. I think he'd either won a prize or he'd finished second in the Guardian Media Awards, and we brought him in, a good few years ago now, into the Scotsman for a chat. And I knew as soon as I set eyes on him, he wasn't going to work out. Because he was able to write, but he wasn't able to communicate. And we showed him around the Scotsman, and we thought, oh God, this guy could definitely write, you know, we could maybe bring him in, train him up. And we said after half an hour, 45 minutes, look, is there any questions? Myself and the sports editor, any questions you'd like to ask? And he said, what's the money like?
That's not a good question, Clue.
And I thought, listen, that's question number 50 on a list of the top 50. You know, when you're 19 or whatever he was, the money really shouldn't matter. You know, it's about the opportunity, getting your foot in the door, proving yourself, and then the money is later.
Rewind you a bit. So you've just landed up at the Sunday Times in Scotland. You're Irish come via London. What did you make of the Scottish sporting world that you were kind of plonked into at that stage?
I thought it was a bit bizarre.
And that was back then.
That was back then. It's got surreal since then. I was my first love was football, soccer, and rugby, and Gaelic games, hurling and Gaelic football. But I played golf and I played a lot of different things. And in Ireland, we are, I would say, a richer sporting country than Scotland, because if you pick up any newspaper or listen to any radio station or watch any TV sports broadcast, there's a range of sports. There's GAA, there's Irish, there's rugby, there's football, there's golf, there's horse racing is massive. In Scotland, it was so heavily dominated by football. And that kind of surprised me, because even though, you know, you think, oh, a guy from Ireland would have been brought up as supporting Celtic. In Limerick, we didn't get any Celtic or Rangers. We just didn't. I was a Liverpool fan since the age of 5. There's only one guy they ever met in Limerick who was a Celtic fan, as in Celtic was his number one club. So I wasn't prepared, really. I didn't know the history of Celtic, didn't know the history of Rangers, didn't know much about the scene at all. But again, you have to learn. Back then, Rangers were the dominant team. Celtic were in desperate trouble. And quite quickly after I arrived, actually, that whole Fergus McCann thing happened, which was a thrill. For a young person, I was kind of right in the firing line, you know, because no one down in London was interested in this stuff in the main edition, the main sports section. So, you know, if I wasn't writing it, no one was writing it. So it was kind of like I'm up against seasoned Scottish journalists who know the landscape, and here I am, a kind of a blow-in, a tourist, trying to live with them And I didn't live with them, but I tried, you know, and eventually I kind of got a handle on it. But it was into the firing line, and it was the making of me, I think, you know, because there was no escaping it.
What was the atmosphere like for you arriving in Scotland? One of the things I talk to them quite a lot about is that first press conference that you've got to go to where nobody knows who you are. That's quite a daunting experience at the start of your... And it's it's kind of a thing... It's not to do with learning journalism, it's about your personality and how you make yourself fit in and who you choose to be within that pack.
Yeah. Do you know what? It was so long ago, I scarcely remember it. But I do, excuse me, I do remember having plenty to say for myself.
I can imagine.
It's, you know, the confidence of ignorance. I thought I knew everything. And I was lucky that around the same time there was another 3 or 4 young guys, young journalists, who were kind of in similar situations in different newspapers. But mostly it was dominated by the old guard. And I would imagine the old guard, not some of the old guard obviously thought I was an uppity tosspot, you know. But I survived. I didn't notice any antagonism really towards me because I was young. I didn't, and I just ploughed on. Was it intimidating? It wasn't really, because back then Rangers were the #1 team, and it was all about football really. Rangers were winning the league, and they were extraordinarily open to journalists. Getting a one-on-one interview with any of the Rangers players was not a problem. So that's what I started to do. I started to get one-on-one interviews with, you know, with all the Rangers players. And that kind of eased me into it, I suppose. And they were given in the paper, because I was laying out the pages, I gave myself loads of space.
What a great splash!
Oh, I was just profile was brilliant, and that kind of got me into it. You know?
And interviews have continued to be kind of one of the things that you're known for, is doing good one-to-one interviews slightly differently. What do you think makes a good interview in sport specifically, or is it specific
well,
to
research
sport?
In the first instance. Now, listen, if a guy turns up or a woman turns up and she's got nothing to say, there's nothing you can do. You know, you can't make a great interview out of a bag of crap. You know, but the most pressure I feel when I'm writing an interview is when the material is brilliant, and I feel real pressure then to do it justice. And it's research. If I'm going to interview somebody, I'll research their life for 5 or 6 hours.
Right.
I'll spend the guts of a day reading everything that I can get my hands on, and letting them know early that I know them. Not going in and asking the same kind of questions. I have a habit of letting them, trying to kind of win their respect by asking them a question very early on that will tell them that I have done my homework. You know, say for example, Joe Fraser, right? This is one of my life highlights. I love the whole Muhammad Ali, Joe Fraser, George Foreman era in boxing, right? I mean, I can't read enough about it. And Joe Fraser came to Aberdeen 5 or 6 years ago, and I went up and I was supposed to interview him for 15 minutes, right? And I ended up staying with him for 2 hours, right? And it was phenomenal. I was really nervous. I don't get nervous going into it, but I was really nervous that day because he was one of my heroes. You know? And I went in, and one of the first questions I asked him was about his sister. Her name was Flossie, right? And Flossie never thought that Fraser would amount to anything as a boy. She used to bully him, right? Even when he had a punch bag tied to a tree and he was beating the hell out of it, she used to say, "You're never going to amount to anything, Joe." And I asked him, I said, if Flossie was alive to see you becoming world champion, what do you think she would have said? Because you died before he became world champion. And he kind of, and that kind of, you could see him going, this kid knows what he's talking about. And I think that was the reason the interview lasted 2 hours, because he knew that I knew him, and I'd done my homework. And I think research is king, you know.
I can hear the moans of like modern day journalists going, we would never get the chance to research for 5 or 6 hours. Probably not in the office, but what I guess you're saying is you can't afford not to do that, even if you have to do it in your own time to get the great interview, which means you spend 2 hours with your sporting hero.
I mean, I was lucky in that was for Scotland on Sunday, so I did have the time. I wasn't having to file every single day, file 2, 3, 4 stories every day. I had the time to write these big interviews. That's a luxury that a lot of journalists don't have anymore. And even the ones that might have had it a year ago don't have it anymore, the way the newspaper market has changed, or the newspaper world has changed. But even if I was writing 2, 3, 4 stories a day, I would have gone home and I would have found the time to research it properly, because, you know, how many in the course of a year, how many interviews would I do that would really make me excited? If there's 10, I'd be surprised. If there's 5 that make me really excited, that's pretty good. You know, I mean, like, you know, ones that I'm going to go, Christ, I'm meeting someone here who's not just a Scottish sports person. This person is like a global figure. And I've done a few of them, and they've been brilliant. You know, they've been, you know, really exciting. You're talking about things, and that's the story I told in a book once, actually. It's the same story about going to interview Joe Fraser, and it tells the way newspapers have gone, the way the media has gone. I spent 2 hours with Joe Fraser. I floated out of the hotel that we were in, checked my tape recorder, praying to God that I hadn't ballsed it up. It had all come out nicely. Got in my car, switched on my mobile phone, and earlier in the week I had applied for an interview with Kirk Broadfoot, who was playing for Rangers at the time. And there was a message from the Rangers PR department saying that Kirk Broadfoot didn't want to be interviewed. And I thought, Jesus, I spent 2 hours talking to Joe Fraser about Muhammad Ali, Richard Nixon, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Kirk Broadfoot doesn't want to talk to me. That's the way the media has gone, unfortunately.
Who have been some of the other great interviews of your career? Who have you just really loved talking to, or who's surprised you?
Boxers and snooker players, bizarrely, are the most honest.
Right.
Sugar Ray Leonard, incredibly honest. Buster Douglas. This is another. Buster Douglas, on the 20th anniversary of Buster Douglas beating Mike Tyson, I rang a journalist in America. Now this was, I don't know if you know, this was the greatest boxing upset in the history of the game, right? Mike Tyson, unbeatable. Buster Douglas, a journeyman, he beats him. Wow. So 20 years later, 20th anniversary, I said, Christ, I'd love to do an interview with Buster Douglas, you know. So I went online and I saw this American journalist had done a small interview with him online about 6 months before.
Right.
So, and there was an email address for the journalist. I emailed him. I said, look, I'm trying to track down Buster. Any chance you... And your man said, yeah, look, this is his number, you know. I said, Christ, that's easy. I said, the number will be out of date. All the numbers are out of date that you get. Rang it, and Buster Douglas answered. Oh, Jesus. And I said, Buster, I'm Tom English. I'm ringing from a newspaper called Scotland on Sunday in Edinburgh. I'd love to talk to you about the day you beat Mike Tyson. Sure, man. No problem. I said, he said, do you want to do it now? I said, no. I'm not ready. I wasn't expecting this. So agreed to speak to him the day after, and had an hour and a half on the phone with him when he told me the most incredible things. And that was a joy, because, you know, you're talking about a guy who mattered on the world stage, history maker, you know, in boxing. So that was a great one. There's been lots. There's been lots. Ronnie O'Sullivan in snooker, Keith Wood, the Irish rugby player. There's been plenty. Plenty of crap ones as well.
Is it harder to do it in Scottish sport? Is it harder to get good interviews? are Scottish sports people naturally more reticent about speaking
No,
openly?
footballers are, but I've gone off interviewed. Football managers, yeah, good, because they have a story to tell. Footballers, and I shouldn't generalise.
No,
but,
you shouldn't, but on you go anyway.
but a lot of footballers now, A, they can't be bothered talking to you, and B, even if they could be bothered, they've nothing to say. I mean, you go into some of the Friday press conferences nowadays. There was one about shortly before I joined the BBC, and Rangers the way they are now, you know, all these young boys knocking around. Well, a lot of old guys as well, to be fair. But you get a player every Friday. You get the manager and you get the player every Friday. And you don't know who the player is going to be. And this is Friday for Sunday's paper, you know. So this player walked in and he looked about 12. And literally none of us knew who he was. He wasn't introduced. We hadn't a clue who he was.
Awkward.
Right? He played like one senior game, if that. Might have come on as a sub about 6 months before. And it was embarrassing.
Do you know what the broadcasters do in that
No.
situation? Just for level, could you tell us your name and what your position?
Yeah, unfortunately, we were just as quick at our feet as that. So and the poor kid. I mean, why they did this to him was just so unfair because he didn't have anything to say. He's a child. He's got he's no story.
But they know what they're doing.
They do know what they're doing. And so I've kind of gone off interviewing footballers. It's hard to get them anyway. So I kind of look, if I'm doing football, I try and do managers. But mostly I try and look at other sports because most other sports are so receptive. Rugby, golf, even the golfers, you know, the big name golfers will sit down with you. Boxers are amazing. Snooker players are amazing.
And golf, do you think because like some of those sports are more mental sports, they're more like golf, you see as a game played in the mind, where a lot of footballs it's just a sort of natural ability.
I think so. And I think they, for some reason, they have an ability to express how they feel, their insecurities, and they have no compunction about telling you about their insecurities. Boxers and snooker players especially. John Higgins, I interviewed him about 6 months ago. He's won, I think, three world championships. And you'd swear that the guy had never potted a ball in his life. And it was so raw and so honest. And I said to him, John, I said, are you sure you want all this coming out? And he says, yeah, that's the way I feel. You know, I feel as if I've lost it, that I will never win another tournament, that I'm wasting my time. Some days I cannot physically get myself to the practice table. It's great stuff, you know. But you would never hear a footballer, rarely hear a footballer talking like that. That's why I try and, even though a lot of what I do is football, it's commentary about football. It's not interviewing footballers because I think it has become a bit of a joyless grind.
I want to talk a bit about the fact that you started in print and have ended up in online and broadcast.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit from your perspective about why you've done that and how it reflects on what's happening in the industry.
I did it. Well, I was with the Sunday Times for 13 years. Initially in London, then in Scotland, then in Ireland. I was the rugby correspondent in Ireland for 8 years. Then I moved to the Scotland on Sunday, married a Scottish girl.
Well done.
There was only one way I was coming after marrying a Scottish girl. I was back to Scotland. And joined Scotland on Sunday as the chief sports writer. And I was there for 9 years. And I thought after 9 years, there'd been cutbacks in the newspaper. There were brilliant people, still are brilliant people in the Scotsman. But the owners just squeezed them until the pips fell out. And the budgets contracted. the opportunity to do the kind of writing that I was doing before got less and less. And it wasn't as enjoyable. And there wasn't the same opportunity to write. So the BBC thing came up, and as you know, I was in and out of the BBC for 3 or 4 years before that, just doing bits and pieces. But the chance came to make that a full-time thing, and I thought, why not? Because you get stale. You do get stale, and I freely admit that by the end of 9 years at Scotland on Sunday and the Scotsman, I got a bit stale, and I was ready for something a bit different.
You've got quite a kind of unique job in there now. Explain what you're
I'm not sure what it is.
No, there's anything else.
Nobody's told me.
That's the best way. Make it up for yourself.
Literally,
but
nobody has told me what it is.
You're writing stuff for the website.
I am.
But you're also part of the broadcast team.
Yes, I am, yeah. And that's it. And I mean, I wanted to keep writing. So the website, and I wouldn't say it's all, as a writer, I wouldn't say it's all about the web now, but it is becoming all about the web. Newspapers that 3 or 4 years ago were swimming against the tide are now going with the tide. In fact, they are getting their stuff online earlier and earlier. These are the same newspapers that refused to put it online a couple of years ago, are now putting it online 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, banging it up there, and then the newspaper comes out the next day. So online journalism is where it's going. I think the Scotsman and the Herald know it. Mm-hmm. With their current owners, I think there's only one way that story is going to end, and that's with digital only in X number of years. Mm-hmm. And I haven't found any difference, to be honest. I still write the same as I did when I was a newspaper guy. Haven't changed anything. But I like radio. I really enjoy it. From the first minute I did it, I thought, God, this is fun. I love the immediacy of it. Mm-hmm. And it's a nice blend. I like the balance of talking, and I'm not saying it's easy. It isn't, because you have to do an awful lot of homework before you go on air. Mm-hmm. But talking about sport, it's not the most arduous gig in the world. It isn't. It's very enjoyable. So I like the blend.
And I think with radio as well, that the part where people think you're working, which is when you're on air, is actually, that's the fun part.
It is.
That's the reward for the hard work. When you're on air, you don't feel like you're working at all.
No, you do, because when I do a lot of talking about football, but there are other shows that I do where I talk about different other sports, and I not to blow my own trumpet, I'm not pretending to be anything other than a hard-working, honest, kind of passionate journalist, but I've always loved lots of different sports. Always. I've always played lots of different sports, very badly, but I've played them. I've always read voraciously about lots of different sports. American sports, all the Irish sports. I read an awful lot. A lot of sports books, a lot of sports magazines. I just love reading great sports writing, and there's still a lot of it out there. Still a lot of it out there in the UK, but especially in America, where they still, with the size of the country, they still have the budgets to back serious journalism, and there's serious sports journalism in America. It's phenomenal. Mm-hmm.
It's a more prestigious occupation within journalism in the States.
It is, yeah. It's really respected. They would see a sports writer on the same level as a political correspondent. They would see it as important. Mm-hmm. So you will have guys, there's a guy called Gary Smith, and he has like a massive contract with his magazine, right? Massive. He writes 6 pieces a year. That's what he does. Right. I would hate that. I would hate it. Because those 6 pieces, they're like about 10,000, 12,000 words. The pressure on him to deliver 6 classic pieces must be mind-altering. But he does it. He says he never opens his computer without doing 50 interviews first for the piece that he's writing. 50. Now, these are the guys I love reading about. I love reading what they produce, but I also love reading about how they produce it. I think that's really, even though I'm 45 and I've been in the game 23 years, I still love reading about how the great ones do it.
Should we have some questions from you lot for Tom? Who wants to go first? Don't be shy. Yeah, on you go.
What would you say the best and the worst parts of being a sports journalist?
Best part is that you get to go and watch sport for free. You sit in the best seats, and occasionally you have to give yourself a slap in the face to remind yourself that the person sitting over there with their 2 children has spent 150 quid to get in to an event that you're at for nothing. That's the best part. The worst part, Jesus. I'm struggling, actually. I'm struggling. I'm struggling. I mean, I love what I do. I love it. But there was a lot of hard work to get there, you know. I don't really see, I would say generally, the way newspapers, I'm still a newspaper, I think I'll always be, even though I'm a BBC now, I'll always be a kind of newspaper guy at heart. The worst thing about the media at the moment is the way newspapers are slowly diminishing. I think there'll always be a need for great journalism, but I think some newspapers will go, and that saddens me. That's the tough thing. And it's hard to get in now. It's hard, believe me. It's hard to get into the media, no matter what medium it is. It's tough. But the downside, it's a great gig.
Yep, Nicky.
You mentioned a few of your best interviews. What was your worst?
How long have we got? My worst interview. Christ, that is a long, long list.
Tell them about the Craig White one that we were talking about in the way in, because I think that's an interesting interview.
Craig White, my old pal. I interviewed Craig White twice before he was arrested and held in custody in Mexico. And the first time I interviewed him, I asked him about his long-term plans for the club. And at the time, this was October 2011, and it went into administration in February 2012. And there was talk about administration going on at the time, and I asked him, I said, look, what about these rumours of administration? And he said, oh, well, listen, you know, other than a slightly regrettable event, I don't see it as a big deal. Christ, you know. And I said, I think Rangers fans might disagree with you. No. So I wrote this, and it's amazing how an interview can have different reactions. It was all as a Q&A, you know, and Celtic fans looked at it and rejoiced because they could see this guy was a complete chancer. And Rangers fans looked at it and rejoiced because he slapped down the BBC and the mainstream media and said he would always fight to the death to protect Rangers against the forces that are trying to bring him down in the media. And they thought, at last, David Murray never protected us from the BBC. Or, this guy's going to protect us. And it was all bizarre, and it just shows you what it's like sometimes. The worst, to go back to what you were saying, the worst part of my job, now that I think of it, is the whole Twitter thing. It's that some reaction you get on Twitter can be pretty hairy,
But you provoke it as well, don't you?
I do,
There's
yeah,
a
no, I
bit of
do.
mischief in you.
There is a mischief, no question. No, I'm not complaining, but some of the guys get a bit close to the bone.
Have you ever thought about coming off social media?
No, I haven't. No, but the worst interview I did, I would say now, come to think of it, was with a hurler, a Kilkenny hurler, and I went to interview him. And again, he was about 20. He was precocious. He was phenomenal. My God, this guy was an athlete. He was a genius, but he couldn't talk. So I went to see him, and it was literally, and I kid you not, it was 1-word and 2-word answers. And I thought, he's winding me up here. And after 5 or 10 minutes of this, I thought, no, he's not winding me up. This is what he's actually like. And I rang the office and said, look, this is a joke. This is not going to work out. And he said, no, we need it. We need you to write this piece. We have a big hole in the paper. You need to write it. And about 1,300 words. I said, Christ, are you kidding me? So I had to write this, and it was dreadful. It was dreadful because I didn't want
Is that available online anywhere?
No, that has been removed from the system. Because I didn't want to, you might think, oh, why don't you write about why he's
monosyllabic.
Why he's monosyllabic. But that would be cruel. Cruel on the kids, So you have to kind of work your way around it. That would be cruel. So, that was tough, and it didn't work at all. But there's many more of us.
Who's next? Yeah, Keelan.
Do you think the media has played a role in causing these monotone footballers to give anodyne answers and things like that? Whereas the rugby players, the cricketers, things like that, they're still media trained, but they're a little bit more open. But could it be because the press really slaughtered footballers in the UK, personal lives, things like that? They've just cut everything off.
It's a good question, and I think there is a fair degree of truth in that for some of them. There is, yeah. What happens is that a young player goes into a football club and they are mentored by older players, and some of those older players might have been shafted by tabloids or whatever. So they're getting a message from senior players, look, you need to be wary of the media. And of course, and there has been I have been at press conferences that have been reported the day after in the most bizarre and unfair way by some newspapers. There's no question. It happens regularly. So I can understand why some of them do it. Equally, I think there is now a culture in football clubs where you put in a request for a player and it never actually gets to the player. And sometimes I've had experience where I've gone to the player and said, geez, guys, thanks for saying no. And he says, what do you mean? And the request has never got to him. The PR department have just kicked it into touch. And that's unfair on the player, because then you think, oh God, that player has refused to talk. And that happens a lot. So these PR departments, I don't know what they're doing, justify their own existence. I don't know. But if I want a one-on-one with a player, it's because I find him interesting, and I'm going to write a piece that reflects positively on the guy. I don't want to stitch him up, but I take your point. I do take your point.
You mentioned there about writing positively about someone that you're interested in. Have you ever felt pressure to write a story in a particular way from the higher ups, like that may not be the way that you feel?
No, never. Not once. Not once in all my years. Never. I wouldn't give in to that. No chance.
Yeah.
I've always thought you've been quite honest, and like when I heard you on the radio and so on, and read some of your kind of work. Is it something you'd encourage to like us students, or is it too hard to be honest when you're speaking, for example, say on BBC, or like would you encourage it basically?
Yeah, I would. As long as if you say something, if you have a strong opinion on something, that you can back it up. Just don't say it because you think it. Back it because you believe it to be true. So if someone says to you, right, why did you say X, Y, and Z? That you can say, well, because, you know, I have information on this or something. It needs to be informed opinion. It can't just be opinion. It needs to be informed based on something that you could argue. I mean, you could disagree, we could disagree, but as long as you have a reason for saying it, that's valid, that's fine. And I would encourage it, yeah, definitely.
Row behind.
Is there anything like you regret doing over the years, or is there anything you would do differently?
Yeah, I kind of regret a couple of things I did. One thing I did in when I was in Ireland was a rugby story that I wrote about a guy, and the story was true. It was about a guy in a rugby player in a fight, right, away from the rugby pitch, and quite a prominent rugby player. And I wrote the story, and I regretted it afterwards, because he came up to me about 6 months later, you know, and I was kind of feeling at the time, I thought, Jesus, should I write this? I was trying to make an impression. I wasn't long doing the rugby at the time. I thought, Christ, this is a good story, you know. And I wrote it, and I'd always had pangs about it, you know. Was that tabloidy? Was that too tabloidy? Should I have been writing that? And about 6 months later, I met the guy in a pub, and he was nice as pie. He was absolutely the sweetest guy. And he said, "Look," I've no problem with what you wrote, but do you mind me asking, why did you write it?" And he absolutely had me. And I said, "Look, I said it reflects badly on me. I said I've struggled with this for 6 months, and I should have been man enough to ring you and say I got it wrong, and I didn't, and I kind of regretted that I didn't." So we shook hands, we had a pint, and it was, you know, very amicable. Yeah, but that's a lesson, you know. If you think you've got it wrong, or if you've wronged somebody, or gone over the score a little bit, get in touch with them, you know, and say, "Listen, sorry," you know.
Because those are the ones that kind of stay with you when you've...
Yeah, even now. And that is, I tell you when that is. That was 1997. And I still remember that. Yeah. I shouldn't have written that. It was just too tabloidy. It wasn't relevant. But you're kind of keen to make a name for yourself, and you plough in there, you know.
Irish Jonathan?
Yeah. How does working as a sports journalist back in Ireland compare to working as one over here?
There's not as much traffic here. There's more diversity in Ireland. Even though I was the rugby correspondent, I still had a chance when there was no rugby on to go and interview jockeys or hurlers or footballers or whatever. Here, it's football. It's too much fun, and I am part of the problem. I freely admit that, even though I try and break out as much as I can. Everyone here wants you to write about football. You know, the boss, the editors, they all want you to write about football. The biggest reaction is when you write about football. And as much as I love football, I think, and I've said this many times, I think it's Scotland's sporting tragedy is their obsession with football, almost to the exclusion of other sports. If I write about rugby, I wouldn't say it's who cares, but there's minimal reaction. If I write about snooker, nobody cares. If I write about golf, even the home of golf, that's one thing that really surprised me. I could write a really nice piece about golf, nobody cares. It's all about football. And I find that coming from a country that is rich in many different sports that are relevant, to come to a country where the real relevance is based on one sport, and also a sport for much of my 10 years here has been down in the doldrums. Like if a sport sets a national sporting mood, football has been gloomy. For much of the teams in Europe have been failing. Celtic have kept their end up for bits and pieces. Scotland, until recently, have failed. Rangers, Hearts, bad news. And not enough Chris Hoyes, not enough Catherine Grangers, not enough John Higgins in the snooker, Ricky Burns. These guys are these people are great sports people. Great. But they get stuck at the back of the sports sections, and instead you have the latest from Hibs. You had a 2-page interview with Kirk Broadfoot. or maybe not.
Yep.
How important do you feel it is to make friends in the world of journalism and football clubs as well?
Say that again, sorry?
How important do you feel it is to make friends in the world of journalism and football clubs as well?
Contacts are critical. Absolutely critical. If I was ye, I would be making contact with all of your favourite writers on Twitter. It's so easy now. Back in my day, when I was writing to sports writers, I wrote them a letter. Now you can tweet, and it gets there like that. And the more people you know, the more people you have access to, the better. Football clubs, it's hard to make contacts in there. But I would say it read as much as you can. Even if you're if whatever you want to do, be radio, TV, print, online, read as much as you can. Get your favourite writers and figure out why you like reading them. Not just that you like reading them, but why. What is it about they do? Whether it's Beggy or online guy or whoever, magazine. Why do you like reading these people? Why do you like listening to these people? Ask yourself that question.
One more question, because David Begg is in the room. Right,
You
James.
mentioned, Twitter and stuff. How much is social media playing into sports journalism?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. It's it's changed the game completely. In a way that I never thought was possible. Say I'm on Scotland on Sunday and the circulation was 40,000, 50,000, whatever the hell it was. With one tweet, I can reach a multiple of that number. So it's a brilliant platform for a journalist, even though fewer people in the history of the newspaper were reading my stuff via purchasing it. More than ever were reading it, hopefully, through the website. The website numbers were through the roof. Website numbers are astronomical. So social media has become the game. If you see it now, you'll see the Telegraph, you'll see the Guardian, you'll see all of these newspapers. If Henry Winter is at a football match, he'll tweet his match report at, 10 minutes after the final whistle, 15 minutes after the final whistle. The quotes piece will be there, bang, be there before 11 o'clock if it's a night Champions League match. That's the game now. The game now is to get your stuff online and tweet it faster than anybody else. That's what it is. And even the newspapers, like the Times, who are very reluctant. 10 years ago, Rupert Murdoch said the internet was a fad. Right? Rupert Murdoch since has invested tens of millions of pounds in his website. And all these journalists are doing online stuff, special stuff, extra stuff. It's the internet, social media, is where it's at. And the more knowledge you have of social media, the bigger chance you have.
It's also a challenge, though, I think, for journalists, isn't it? When second year we're up at the BBC talking to Tom Connor and he was saying, back when Mo Johnston signed for Rangers and there was no social media, you might, as an ordinary person, think, I've heard that Mo Johnston's maybe going to sign for Rangers, and you might phone a newspaper and say, I've got a story for you. Where now you'll go on your own Twitter account and say,
Yeah.
So you've got this challenge of almost everyone can publish their stories without...
Everyone can, it's brilliant. I mean, to be a young journalist now is great because you have more opportunities to get your stuff out there than we had. The problem is, until you get paid for it, it's a hobby. It's not a career, and that's the challenge. And let's go back to something I said earlier. What is special about you? What are you bringing to the table? You know, you need to stand out. You need to show an editor, whether it's your passion or your ideas or something that's different to the guy sitting next to you. That I should get the job, not him, because of this is what I've got and he doesn't have it. And that is absolutely critical, that you have got something that somebody else doesn't have.
That's great. I think we'll need to wind it up there, which is a shame because I've found it really, really interesting to talk to Tom and Annie. So David's going to be on in a minute, but first let's just a bit of appreciation for Tom.
Thank you.